you for that. All right. And I just say got it. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. No pressure, I noticed. Litzana mentioned the book launch that we held in Lichfield at the beginning of September. Just to say, I would have invited you all, but with the COVID restrictions, we felt it was sensible to do a fairly small event. So we just invited sort of 40 people, and that included family and friends as well. But Andy and Litzana were there, and they can report back to you on the event if you're that interested. But we're going to look at some of the key issues. But before we do that, I just wanted to say thank you to Litzana for this event, and thank you to this rig, because wittingly or unwittingly, everyone here has inspired me at some point. This book was 7 years in the writing, and for 5 of those years, I was regularly attending rig events. So it's been a real privilege and a treat to learn so much from so many of you, whether you knew it or not at the time. Particularly, I want to say thank you to Chris James, who was unable to be at the launch and is unable to be here for illness, but I hope he's on the mend. I know he's going through a tough time at the moment. But also to Ron Hill and to Raj, who is also here this afternoon, Andrew Wilkins, who isn't here, and Andy Allen, who we've written 2 or 3 things together and learned a lot from each other. Well, at least I've learned a lot from him. I hope he's learned a bit from me occasionally. And again, he like Litzana was able to speak at the launch of this book. Right, so I'll try to be fairly brisk about this. I want to talk about the key issues that I raise, and I'll be really interested in any challenges. And I do have some suggestions towards the end for breakout topics, if Litzana wants to go in that direction. This book came, as I said, 7 years ago. Its birth was then because I had a visit. I was I was living in Somerset at the time, in a small village, and I was governor of a couple of local schools, a primary and a secondary, where I'd been chair in both of them at various times. And I was working in my office, which was at the bottom of the garden, and I received a visit. Just before we go to the visit, Litzana, if you could go to slide 2, please. This man did not visit me in my office in Somerset, but he was there at the book launch, as you can see. Fortunately, he didn't say much. I've always thought of him as rather a 2-dimensional character. But anyway, he stood in the corner and observed proceedings. And as you can see, he was holding a copy of my book. So if we move on to slide 3, a more animated visitor was a very old friend of mine who I don't name in the book, but he revealed himself. He sort of came out at the launch event as the man who stimulated the first stir-ins of the book. Peter was the vicar in this small Somerset village in which I lived, and he was rather like me, a sort of multi-governor, and he was governor of one school that I didn't have particular connections with, 2 villages away from us, in a little village called Stoke Subhampton. And he came to me and said he was very concerned that Ofsted had visited the school, had decided that it was inadequate, and they were going about converting it to an academy. Now, in 2014, the law on academy conversion was very straightforward, and it said very clearly that any school converting to become an academy was required to go through a consultation. And Peter was expressing concerns to me about the fact that the school hadn't gone through any such consultation, and there had been various meetings with various people from the local authority, from a potential sponsor group and from a DFE academy broker. Are we all happy that we know what an academy broker is? Is there anybody who needs a quick introduction to the role of the academy broker? I don't know whether anybody can put a hand up or not. You're all okay with that, I think. Okay, stop me if you want to ask any questions. So if we can go on to slide 4, please, Litsana. This is Castle Primary School. But at the time, in 2014, the summer of 2014, about 140 children. Fairly standard Somerset primary school in the midst of a whole batch of primary schools, all of them either good or outstanding at the time. And the only problem with Castle was that it had lost its head teacher in 2010 through retirement, and it hadn't been able to replace them, which was a fairly standard issue in small village primary schools, and even in Somerset. So the school had been leaderless and rudderless for 3 or 4 years, and the county council had done almost nothing to support it, and that was Somerset County Council's key role, to make sure that schools like this were supported. And indeed, I was governor of the next village school along, and we were just in the process of federating. We had federated by then with another small village school under one excellent head teacher. And in fact, a couple of years earlier, when they were clearly having problems, we went to Castle and suggested that they might federate with us, but they didn't want to do that. So they were in a difficult situation, and they were now being required by Ofsted to convert to an academy. And this was the law on slide 5. This was just one phrase in the law, but an important one that we must be grateful to actually the Liberal Democrat Party, which had joined the Conservatives in coalition at the time, because while Michael Gove wanted to force through the Academies Act, eventually allowing any school to convert, and whether its community wanted to or not. We must also be grateful to the National Governors Association, as it then was, because that advised very strongly that communities should be engaged with the future of their schools, which wasn't an issue for Gove at the time. So the fact that a consultation must take place, and that consultation must be on the question of whether the school should be converted into an academy, was absolutely key part of the Academies Act. It was later taken away once the Lib Dems came out of government after the 2015 election. This paragraph disappeared from the law, but at that time that was the law. So this was a key element in Peter Thomas's concern, and he represented the rest of his governing board in talking to me about this. So so let's just quickly look at what consultations are about. What do they mean? And here it is indeed. Thank you, Litsana. The history of this moment is that the governors were told, and the parents were told, that the school must become an academy. And there was a meeting on the very last day of the summer term, 24 hours after the Ofsted report was published, when the local authority came along and addressed the parents and said that the school would be converting to become an academy. And very little was said, if anything, about a consultation. And a few months later, in November, the governors were told if they did not agree to the school converting, and they had expressed great doubts, and particular doubts about the sponsors that the county had chosen, then they would be sacked and they would be removed from office and the school would be converted anyway. And eventually, after a very emotional meeting, the governors agreed and agreed to oversee this conversion and conduct a consultation. And the following day, the academy broker from the DFE wrote this letter to the chair of governors. No, it was the previous one, Litzana, sorry. That's it. So if we could just have a look at this letter, this is an email sent to the chair of governors from the DFE representative requiring the school that has told the governors they must convert. And thank you, Raj, for saying this is not an isolated case. I was just looking at one example here, and then I go into the general case in the book. Okay, so ideally the decision of the governing body, says the academy broker, would remain confidential until an academy order is issued. But I realized that would be very difficult in this instance. Communication to parents and staff needs to say that the governing body has decided to ask that the Secretary of State to agree to Castle joining the Red Start Learning Partnership. Please don't write anything that suggests that a decision has been made, as ministers don't like it, and both parents and staff would most likely suggest that consultation is therefore invalid. Reassure them that there will be full consultation after the Secretary of State has given agreement in principle, and that you hope this will happen before the end of term, so that there can be consultation in January. It is also important that the message about the benefits of joining the Red Start Learning Partnership are flagged from the start, and that all messages are very positive ones. Personally, I would avoid the word sponsor, as it can be quite emotive. Now, this is a quite shameless statement from the DFE saying you've made the decision, this conversion will happen, but you as governors must not talk about it or present it as being a decision that's already made, because we have to go through the governors, we have to go through the consultation. And similarly, then shortly after that, the consultation was taken to the staff. The staff had to be consulted, the parents had to be consulted, and the community had to be consulted. That was the requirements of a public consultation, still are if you go into a consultation. So let's have a look at the letter to staff, inviting them to a consultation about the future of the school. With the move forward to join the Red Start Learning Partnership proposed to become effective on the 1st of March 2015, I would like to invite you all to a staff consultation and a briefing session on Wednesday, the 14th of January in the school, where at this meeting, we are aiming to cover any concerns or questions relating to the coming changes. No indication there was going to be any question about that key element, whether the school should be converted into an academy or not. And then they wrote to the parents, Litzana, if you would. And the parents, that's not quite so clear, is it? I would like to, this is a letter, this isn't from the chair of governors, it's not from the governing board, it's from the man who has already, by January, been appointed to the new headship. And he's been appointed not by the governors, but by the chair of governors on the instruction of the leader of the trust, a woman called Suzanne Flack. And the man who's been appointed without interview or competition was Mrs. Flack's deputy at the primary school of which she was head, and the first school of the trust that she was leading. And there it is. I would like to invite you to meet with myself and Mrs. Flack to discuss the proposed academy conversion. At the meeting, we will outline briefly the process of converting to an academy. We will also be providing information on how the multi-academy trust will work. We have already blah, blah. You can read the rest of it when the slides come out to you, but you can see there is no suggestion of consultation. Nobody's going to be asked whether they want this consultation to happen or not. Now, I've gone into a bit of detail there, because I think this is key stuff. What we have here is a local authority, and by the way, when the local authority representative spoke to the parents, in July, 6 months before this letter, he said to them, he said to them, special measures means academy conversion. And he confirmed that he'd said that to me in an email later on. And what he was saying was, don't interfere with this process because it'll be bad for the children and it'll be bad for the school. So right from the start, the local authority, then the DFE, then the sponsor trust were deceiving the parents and the staff and the children of the school in order to make sure that the school became an academy, which was what they all wanted. Even Somerset County Council, who by this time, for the first time for some years, had a Conservative council and therefore was fully behind the forced academisation process. So this was the regime that Michael Gove introduced in 2010. And it was a regime that was led by deceit and by force. We'll just go on briefly to the community consultation, another part of the requirement here, and we'll see the invitation to the community consultation. By this time, of course, the new head was already in post. There was no possibility of going back on any of this. And so here we are. Here's an invitation to a consultation process. The governing body, it says, has already, this is in a little community newsletter. And it was the only example of the invitation to the consultation. And of course, I have all this evidence collected, and I've reproduced the important stuff in the book. Many of you will be aware that the governing body voted in favour of the school becoming an academy, doesn't say the circumstances. A consultation process is currently being undertaken. Frequently asked questions about the process have been posted on the school website. That was purely the DFE general FAQs. There was nothing about the school as an individual school. And then it says if you would like to be involved in this consultation process, no question of whether your views will make any difference, and so on. So this is a pretty shameless brushing aside of 150 years of school governance by local people. I mean, for some of that time, not enormously democratic, because it was local councillors doing the appointments very often, but certainly over the last 30 years, there had been village engagement. People had been encouraged to think of the school as their school and something in which they could speak about for the future. So this was happening. This then was going on all throughout the country, and if you read Schools Week and the Times Educational Supplement and other educational press, you'll be able to find these things going on. And what I talk about in the book is there are some good mats, there are some good academy schools. Castle School is now a good school, but it's no longer a school that belongs to the people. And what message, I wonder what educational message to children and the parents picked up from this process. It was that we don't care really what the public want. We don't care what the community wants. This is how we want to run schools in the future. So I then spent, after that was 2014, going into 2015, and I've then spent the last 6 years putting the book together, getting together different examples, and having quite a lot of trouble in getting it published, because oddly, the first publishers who happily took it on, and I worked with them for 2 or 3 years. When I eventually produced a manuscript and sent it in, they said, this is great, thank you very much. And we were talking about publication dates and launch dates and so on. When suddenly they emailed me on a Saturday morning and said they decided they weren't going to publish it after all. And I then discovered 6 months later from Warwick Mansell, the educational journalist, that the publishers, 3 of the men involved in the publishers, in the publishing company, were involved in taking over the school, Holy Cross School in Waltham Abbey in Hertfordshire, that for 2 years fought against forced academisation. So actually, at the very time that we thought the book was going to be published, these people were involved in exactly the same struggle that I described in Castle Stall. And they'd obviously suddenly realized and read the book and thought, oh, we would not publish it after all. So we had to sort of start all over again. So that was interesting. At the launch, as Andy and Lizana will remember, we looked at a crime board, bit of a fan of detective series and so on, police procedural as they call it, and they always have a murder board or a crime board. So if we can look at the murder board, the crime board, sorry, nobody here has died as far as we know yet. If we could move on, Lizana. Thanks. Just very briefly, we did a bit of a whodunit, and there was a lot more information available here for the people who were at the launch, and they went through loads of different examples and so on. But we looked at these 4 groups, no, these 5 groups, I should say, to see if we could pin down what had been going on, what were the roots of this process that I had seen close to with an individual stall, and that we were seeing now all over England, of course, not Wales or Scotland. And was it, at the top left, was it the neoliberals? Was it the book published by Oliver Letwin and John Redwood in the 1980s called Privatising the World? There's a bit of a clue there. Is this privatisation? I think not. I think it's corporatisation. It's handing stalls over to corporate bodies, trust boards. Below that, there's what you might call the new blob. I'm quite interested in the new blob. You remember Michael Gove used to talk very negatively about what he called the old blob. The education blob were people who knew about education. And Gove has frequently said, even in recent months, that he has no time for experts. And so the thing he didn't like about the old blob was that they actually knew something about education. The new blob is full of people who run academy trusts, like John Nash and Theodore Agnew. And the commonality that they have, these people, is they don't know anything about education. They don't know anything about teaching. There's also, of course, the cronies at the bottom there, and they're the people who manage to gift people stalls. So bottom right, you can just about see the head of Lord Harris, the man who owns Carpetright, and whose trust he has quite a large number of stalls, Harris Academies, and they've been in the news quite recently for not very good reasons. And Lord Harris has gifted his trust to his family. So when he dies, which will be quite soon, because he's well into his 80s, the family will take over the trust. That's an interesting model for education. I don't know what it has to do with good stalling. On the right-hand side, we see the money lovers. And we've seen, and I give many examples of egregious money earning, high rates of pay, up to £450,000 in one principal's case, trustees who are having jollies to New York and Australia in order to learn about education, all on money that is meant for children. And at the top right-hand side, probably the immediate principals in this, Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings. And Michael Gove is, of course, effectively owned by Rupert Murdoch. So again, we come back to money and power through the press, but mainly power through money. And the most, again, the common thing about the people who are now running stalls in this country is that a large number of them know nothing about education and they have lots of money. So if we can move on, I want to suggest, and you may want to pick this up in breakout rooms. How are we doing for time, Lizana? No. Another
We're doing fine, Nigel.
Okay, thanks. I want to suggest that there are 4 lies that are around academisation. So first of all, Michael Gove claimed that academisation would give schools autonomy. Now, he didn't talk about autonomy from whom. Schools that were part of local authorities that I worked in for 20 years or more, 25 years, I don't remember being particularly restrained as a head teacher by what the local authority required me to do. I remember we had a lot of freedom about curriculum and all sorts of areas and behaviour and so on. But we were told that because schools weren't autonomous and they were doing what local authorities or the old blob were telling us to do, in that case, we would have, we would be much better off if we just left it to the teachers and the head teachers. Now, just last week, I read a piece by Michael Payne. Michael Payne is Chief Executive Officer of Forum Strategy. He's not a teacher. He's never been a teacher or an educationalist. He runs a recruitment agency, and he also runs this company called Forum Strategy, which conducts conferences and that sort of thing. So he's pushing himself forward as an expert on education. And he was concerned about a recent publication from the Association of School and College Leaders. And this is what he said. He said last week's blueprint from ASCL marks the latest stage in a growing misunderstanding around the original philosophy and vision for academy trusts, envisaged by Tony Blair and Andrew Adonis, and later expanded upon by Michael Gove. Now, so Michael Payne is claiming to have an insight into the philosophy that Michael Gove relied upon when he introduced the Academies Act 2010. And this is what Payne goes on to say. He says, Blair and Adonis and Gove, but we'll focus on Gove, may be controversial figures, but in generating academy freedoms, they recognise that one-size-fits-all national solutions devised in Whitehall rarely translate into improvement and innovation. Their aim was to create a system where the vision and direction of our schools, the development of collaborative improvement models, and the content of the curriculum were shaped by those best placed to do it, governing boards and expert leaders and teachers on the ground. Now, I have never heard anybody misunderstand or misinterpret what Michael Gove's motives were in introducing academies so blatantly as this. Of course, the myth was that autonomy would give schools the freedom they needed to teach as well as they possibly could. What we know is that the opposite is true, that schools, individual schools, don't have any autonomy. They are answerable to their MATs. MATs don't have any autonomy because they are answerable directly to the DfE. And what Andrew Wilkins has described as third-party agencies come into play here. The government decides what it wants education to be like, and it doesn't want to do it itself. So it creates a number of organisations, most of them MATs, which it can instruct to behave in the way that it requires them to do so through requiring compliance. And not just MATs, but also other organisations. And I cite, for example, Ofsted is an obvious example of such a third-party agency that imposes the government's will and removes autonomy from the profession of education. And also, I'm afraid, sadly, more recently, the National Governors, or now called the National Governance Association, which is much less a membership organisation as it used to be, and is now providing free governor training based on money provided by the DfE. So getting the sort of governors that the DfE wants, not anything else. So that's the second myth, the myth of independence. These schools nowadays are not independent. They are answerable to the MATs that run them, and the MATs have much more control over them than the local authorities have over their maintained schools. There was a third myth that schools would be able to innovate in an exciting way. Well, they can, but only if that excitement is shared by the DFE. And if you want to have a look at a book by Richard House called Pushing Back to Ofsted, he describes how the Steiner schools, of which he is a particular fan and supporter, the Steiner schools, some of which are independent and some of which are state-funded schools, as you know, maybe you will know, that they have different principles and values to many other schools, and they say children should learn to read and write at their own speed. And so they don't necessarily start teaching. This is a very oversimplification, but they might not start teaching reading and writing until the children are 7 or so. And there's much more emphasis in the younger years on play. Well, Ofsted didn't like this. Amanda Spielman, the accountant, the chartered accountant, who is our chief inspector now, went to Ofsted and said she was very unhappy about the Steiner schools because they weren't doing what they were told. They weren't fitting into the framework that Ofsted believes in. And so she asked the DFE to set up an inquiry into the Steiner schools, and some of them have already been closed. And the excuse that's been used has been safeguarding. So safeguarding is an interesting opportunity to demand compliance. And if you find that your local school is being questioned about its safeguarding, that will represent all sorts of other issues that are going on that Ofsted want to address and the DFE wants to address. So, we're into a world of compliance. And then the fourth element is the one about improvement. And what we do know is that, as I say in my book, and I address this particularly, there is no definitive evidence to show that academies work. They don't seem to produce better results than LA schools. Here's a quote from an Education Policy Institute report of 2018, and the EPI is not a great fan of academies. Academies do not provide an automatic solution to school improvement. There is significant variation in performance at both different types of academies and multi-academy trusts. So overall, we find little difference in the performance of schools in academy chains and local authorities. The type of school is therefore less important than being in a high-performing school group. Indeed, we find that both academy chains and local authorities feature at the very top of our performance tables and at the very bottom. So we have a series of lies here built on those little lies that I cited, back in 2014, when Ofsted and the DFE and the local authority had decided that Castle Primary School was going to become an academy, and the first academy of that type in that part of Somerset. And here we have enormous lies about the entire education system. So where are we headed, Litzana, on slide 12? And I don't think I'm exaggerating, and I hope in the book that I've sort of led up to this slightly more slowly and gradually than I have done this afternoon. What we have is a country where it's difficult to distinguish corporate power from governmental power. And when you get into that stage, you're on the way to a fascist state, said author John le Carré in 2005. And I'm very sorry to say that I believe that's where we are heading, that the corporate power of the people running MATs, who are the sort of people that you've seen at political conferences recently, Ben Elliott amongst them, people like Sir Paul Marshall, hedge fund investors. Many of these schools, as I show with evidence in the book, many of these schools are effectively owned by hedge fund investors and not by educators. The new blob is now distinguished by its possession of money and power and closeness to the political system. So, Litzana, on slide 13, there's some breakout questions which you may want to use, or you may want to do something different. But here's 4 questions that you might want to consider. First of all, who done it? Who was responsible for DFE policy making since 2010? Was it as simple as Michael Gove doing what Rupert Murdoch wanted him to do? By the way, the very first meeting that Michael Gove had when he was appointed Secretary of State for Education in 2010 was he met with Rupert Murdoch and Murdoch's education advisor, Joel Klein, who had been setting up charter schools in the States. Was a meeting on the embankment on a site by the Thames that Murdoch wanted the government to give him to build one of the first academies. And the only thing that stood in their way was that it turned out that News International had been hacking the phone of a murdered schoolgirl, and they were at their lowest point, and they actually had to close the News of the World, if you remember. But Murdoch wanted an academy. Why did he want an academy? Was it to educate children, or was it because they had a wonderful curriculum model that they wanted to impose on the school, one based on knowledge rather than skills, that they would take possession freely of the most valuable land in London on the edge of the Thames near Canary Wharf, and that he would be able to employ all sorts of organizations and people that he favored, and also make a public statement about his interest in education? Or was it because he genuinely wanted to help children learn better? Well, so who was responsible for DFE policy making? Where does it go back to Letwin and Redwood in the 1980s, to that element of Thatcherism? Are autonomy and independence and innovation and improvement the myths of academisation, or are they genuine gains in the schooling system? Will the government attain its desire for total academisation, which it has stated? And if so, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And what might a value-based approach to policy making on the structure of schooling provision look like? Well, you've been enormously patient, and I hope that's been helpful. It's a very rushed introduction to a book, as I say, that took me 7 years to write. I genuinely believe, I've written a few books before, I genuinely believe this is the most important book that I've written. And people who have read it 2 or 3 times, including, I have to say, my wife, have said that it makes them angrier every time they read it, and it does me when I pick it up again and look for examples, and I think, good heavens. But thank you all, and I hope you, some of you will come to read it, and I hope you enjoy it and find it interesting, and see if it can maybe even make a difference.
Lovely, thank you so much, Nigel. And again, really fascinating to listen to your reflections on the book, what it tries to capture, and also the journey you've been on. And just thank you for joining us, really, and to give us more of your time to really talk us through it. Without further ado, I think we are going to break into breakout rooms. We have 16 colleagues, so there will be 4 breakout rooms with 4 people in each room. And then if you could look at Nigel's questions that he's produced, I will also pop it in the chat so that you can pick up on that. Can you please discuss those, and then we'll bring you back after 15 minutes to then discuss and also ask Nigel further questions if you would like to explore this even more in greater detail. So thank you so much, Nigel. That's been fantastic. Button. Right, so over to you, Andy and Abdullah. Would you like to share your screen, or are you happy just to talk to us?
I'm happy just to talk. I think Andy is just still here. I don't know whether, Lisa, you got the brief. Is it easy for you to just show it up on your screen?
Not at the moment, but did you email that through to me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pick up on that in a minute, because I was teaching before I started today's meeting. No problem, I'll pick that up.
I can share my screen if it's okay. That's fine.
Yep, no problem. I can make you host. That's fine.
Can I just say too that it's been a fabulous afternoon, but I'm actually, I didn't know we'd be on this late, and I'm teaching in another part of the building at 6, so I've got to get across and set up.
Okay.
But the principal investigator actually of this project, it's a great project, is actually Abdullah. And I know he'll smash it in terms of, say, presenting. So I'm going to I'll quietly leave in a minute or two, but nice to see everybody.
No problem. Thanks for joining us, Andy. And just to plug it a little, Andy's also presenting next time in November at our next event.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thank you so much. And yeah, enjoy your evening teaching. Just very quickly, everybody, I think so. I'm not going to take too much time. We're about to start this project in November, and it's a project that's funded by BELMAS, and our main aim is to investigate the role of teaching staff governors in the governance of educational institutions in Birmingham. So in a way where I suppose I'm hoping where it would add to the current research and practice and understanding of governance is we're doing this across not just in schools, but in schools, colleges and universities and in Birmingham. So hoping to bring governance practice across these phases, but with a particular focus on the professional status and professional role that practicing educators play in the governance. And really the question is, do they really have a meaningful say in influencing strategy in governance? So we're looking at couple of multi-academy, academy schools, secondary, primary, university, and a college in Birmingham. So we're just about to start doing that. So we look at their roles, how they are seen by other governors, external governors, lay governors, and how teaching staff governors they see themselves from their experiences. So we hope to bring more insight, and we also have an aim to establish a platform, some sort of a blog to share our experience of researching this area and any findings as we come across. So that's really what I would like to say about this right now. So as I said, it's Andy and also one of doctoral students from BCU, Bernadette Radcliffe, I would be joining us as well. So I think her name has just changed after a wonderful wedding to Rayleigh. Yeah, so that's really what the project is going to be about, but we hope to bring you development and interim findings in the future sessions over the year.
Yeah. Thanks, Abdullah. So the intention is for you then to, at various points, to feedback to us and to share with us your findings, and we will then track that with you as you go along. Is that the plan?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And thank you, GA. You're going to be part of the expertise forum as well, Fiona, right? Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely, and many congratulations, because I know it was a big project, and also you worked really hard on getting the funding and putting this together. So well done, and we're really looking forward to learning more about this. And I'm sure you will let me know at which intervals you need to talk to us about that as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Lovely. Thanks, Abdullah. Really appreciate that. Okay, so we're sort of reaching the end of our RIC meeting. And again, I just want to thank everyone for their presentations, contributions, enthusiasm. And as I've said already, Andy will be presenting next time, talking to us about corporate governance. And so he is going to produce a little abstract for the event, and I shall send that out soon. And if there are any colleagues in the room who would like to contribute as well in future, in terms of future events, please do let me know, because it'd be lovely to hear from our early careers researchers. I know many of you are currently doing your own personal research, so it would be a great opportunity for you to feedback and tell us about that journey as well. So thanks to everyone, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, Lisanna. Thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
Nigel, I just want to say I'm really enjoying the book. It's great. It's just, I can't put it down. It's you know, thank you so much.
I agree.